Despite many comedic moments, Rick and Morty Season 7, Episode 10, provided a poignant, surprisingly deep ending to the anarchic show's latest installment. Rick and Morty Season 7 significantly altered the Adult Swim hit's status quo. For one thing, when series star Justin Roiland was accused of domestic violence in January 2023, this season took over as the voice of both title characters. For another, Rick and Morty Season 7 ended its biggest and most dramatic storyline ever in the middle of the season, when evil Morty assisted Rick in finally killing his nemesis, Rick Prime. While Rick was relieved to see his adversary defeated, the events of Rick and Morty Season 7, Episode 5, Unmortricken, left him shaken. After Rick Prime's death, Rick and Morty Season 7 could have gone anywhere, so it was somewhat surprising when the series mostly focused on lighter, sillier standalone stories in the subsequent episodes. The season finale, however, provided an explanation for this choice. Rick and Morty were introduced to the Hole in Season 7, Episode 10, Fear No Mort, a strange space that simulated the user's greatest fear once they stepped inside, allowing them to conquer it. The themes explored and through lines of the outings were addressed by the end of Rick and Morty Season 7, with major setups for Season 8. When Rick and Morty returned from the Hole, they discovered Rick's wife Diane in their living room, thanks to a miraculously timed portal jump by a dying Rick. Rick appeared to be reunited with his lost love, but he and Morty soon realized that they were still in the Hole, and that this was all a ruse designed to simulate their deepest secret fear. Morty's simulation of Diane saved Rick from wasting away, but the two were still trapped down there. This resulted in a scene reminiscent of Rick and Morty Season 7, Episode 9's hilarious death montage, in which they repeatedly thought they had escaped. After several fake-outs, the pair eventually escaped when Morty realized Rick had never followed him into the Hole at all. Morty was alone down there, and his biggest fear was that Rick saw him as essentially replaceable. Morty realized he was afraid of relying on Rick, which allowed him to wake up and finally emerge from the Hole. By confronting his fear, Morty concluded that Rick did not regard him as irreplaceable, which was not a bad thing. Rather, it meant that Morty could be more self-sufficient and that he didn't have to revolve his entire life around Rick because his grandfather saw him as a beloved sidekick, but not his entire world. This realization was significant for Morty, but it meant that viewers saw little of Rick in Fear No Mort. After Morty jumped into the Hole, the Ricks seen for the majority of the episode were simply Morty's projections. When Morty told Rick that a version of Diane was down in the Hole, Rick seemed to run back to jump in after telling Morty he would take his advice and avoid it. Instead, he took a moment to place a photograph of Morty on the Hole's wall of fame. Rick's arrogance and belief that he can outwit everyone are two of his greatest flaws, but this moment demonstrates his ability to change for the better. Rick's moment of humility demonstrated that he, like Morty, underwent significant character development in Season 7. Rick clarified 2 points by refusing to jump into the Hole. One was that he knew what it was like to be afraid and could admit it. Even if Morty survived the experience, Rick had also learned to appreciate his life as it was. Rick was a self-destructive anti-hero who sought out dangerous adventures that put his life in danger for the first few seasons of the show. In Fear No Mort, he turned down the opportunity to see Diane again in order to maintain his current setup and satisfaction with Rick and Morty's Sanchez-Smith family. In the post-credit stinger for Fear No Mort, Mr. Poopy Butthole used a portal gun he stole from Rick to replace another version of himself who was still happily married. Instead of improving his own life, Poopy Butthole stole the life of this alternate version of himself, a move that darkly echoed Rick and Morty's Season 7 character arcs. In Fear No Mort, Morty was confronted with the notion that if Rick was happy, he wouldn't need him. Even after an entire Rick and Morty episode without Rick, Morty was terrified, but he stood firm and faced his fear. Similarly, since Rick Prime's death, Rick has been forced to question his motivation. Instead of solving his problems, Poopy Butthole replaced himself with another version of himself. Similar to Morty's imagined version of Rick living in the Hole with a simulation of Diane, willfully ignoring reality. The real Rick, on the other hand, did not follow this path. Rick purposefully avoided jumping into the Hole, despite the fact that it might reunite him with Diane, because he valued his imperfect life. Poopy Butthole, on the other hand, refused to learn from his mistakes. Amy's dissatisfied expression at Poopy Butthole suggests that he is doomed to repeat his tragic character arc. This would have been the case for both of Rick and Morty's heroes had they not faced and overcome their fears. Rick and Morty has always been a show about the titular characters' relationships. While Rick and Morty Season 7, Episode 8 did not feature Rick, and the Season 7 premiere did not feature Morty, the dynamic between the two is the driving force behind the show's action. As a result, the ending of Fear No Mort made sense. revealing that the Season 7 finale was, at its core, about why Morty needed Rick. Rick has needed Morty before, as evidenced by episodes such as the Season 4 finale, Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry, and the Rick-Churian Morty date. But this episode flipped the formula for a fresh take on the theme. Rick and Morty's Season 7 finale set the stage for the show's heroes to embark on more solo adventures in the future. Season 7 teased this possibility throughout its episodes, beginning with the premiere in Episode 3, Air Force Wong, which barely involved Morty, and ending with Episode 7, Wet Quat Amortican Summer, which centered on Morty and Summer. Season 8 could, however, take this concept and run with it. Viewers may get full episodes focusing on one or both characters, as Fear No Mort demonstrated that Rick and Morty's heroes don't need each other to survive, but rather collaborate because they make each other better.